Before he became famous, Vanilla Ice claims he survived a brutal stabbing and a near-fatal nightclub attack. When he was 16, he got caught in the middle of a gang fight in South Dallas and was stabbed 5 times, one wound narrowly missing his heart. Doctors reportedly said the blade came so close that another half-inch would have killed him. Months later, he was nearly beaten to death outside a club after a show, leaving him with permanent nerve damage in his arm. This doll belonging to a 5-year-old girl has been watching over her gravesite since her death in 1912. In April of 2001, 20-year-old Branson Perry completely vanished from his father's home in Skidmore, Missouri. He told a friend he was stepping outside to put a pair of jumper cables into the shed, but was never seen again. His van, wallet, and all personal belongings were left behind. Despite searches, interviews, and 2 decades of investigation, no remains have ever been found and no one has ever been charged. To this day, Branson Perry's disappearance remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved cases. In 2012, Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine nearly died from an undiagnosed ectopic pregnancy, which happens when a fertilized egg implants outside the uterus, usually in a fallopian tube, where it can't grow and can rupture suddenly, causing severe internal bleeding. She went on stage while bleeding internally, thinking it was normal pain, and later learned her fallopian tube had ruptured, leaving what doctors described as a Coke can's worth of blood inside her abdomen. She required emergency surgery to remove the tube and stop the internal bleeding. Florence later said it was the closest she's ever come to dying by far. In 2023, 16-year-old Bryce Brooks from Atlanta jumped into the ocean in Pensacola to save 4 younger kids he'd never met who were being pulled out by a strong rip current. He managed to help get them to safety, but the current dragged him under before he could escape. A family friend, 67-year-old Charles Johnson II, rushed in attempting to save Bryce but was also pulled under. The 4 children survived, but Bryce and Charles didn't make it, and both were later honored as heroes for sacrificing their lives to save others. In 2010, 77-year-old rancher and hunting expert Don Alejo lived alone on a piece of land near Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, when a local cartel began demanding that he hand over his ranch, a common tactic in the region. They suddenly gave him 24 hours to vacate the property or be killed. Alejo told them he'd think about it, but instead, when the cartel left, he prepared for war. That night, he stayed up fortifying his home. He barricaded doors, moved furniture into firing positions, and set up multiple loaded rifles and shotguns at windows facing all approaches. At dawn, several cartel trucks rolled in expecting an easy takeover, but instead, the gunmen walked straight into a one-man ambush. From inside the house, Don Alejo opened fire with military-level precision. The firefight lasted nearly an hour, and by the time authorities arrived, they found 4 cartel members dead and at least 2 more critically wounded. The house was torn apart by gunfire, and Don Alejo was found inside, killed by return fire, still clutching his shotgun. Mexican Marines who processed the scene later said it was obvious he knew he wouldn't survive. He had prepared it as a final stand. Don Alejo's ranch was never taken by the cartel, and he became a national symbol of defiance in a region where most people are too terrified to fight back. In 2014, 23-year-old Ashley Gabrielle Huff spent nearly a month in jail because a cop mistook dried SpaghettiOs on a spoon in her car for meth. She couldn't afford bond, so she sat in a county cell while her life unraveled, missing her child's birthday, losing her job, and watching everything fall apart over a crusty spoon. When the crime lab finally tested it weeks later, the result was immediate. It wasn't meth at all, just pasta sauce like she said it was. The charges were dropped on the spot long after the damage was done. In 1999, 11-year-old Mikkel Biggs vanished from a quiet neighborhood in Mesa, Arizona while waiting for the ice cream truck. Her younger sister ran inside for less than 2 minutes, and when she came back, Mikkel was gone. All that remained was her bike lying in the street, its front wheels still spinning, and the 2 quarters she'd been holding to buy her treat. Despite massive searches and decades of leads, no trace of Mikkel has ever been found, as her sudden disappearance remains one of Arizona's most haunting mysteries. This woman convinced herself she needed human blood to survive the way other people need food. Starting in 1989, Brisbane's Tracy Wigington started killing animals, storing their bodies, and drinking their blood in private feedings before deciding she needed a living human victim. With 3 friends, she lured 47-year-old Edward Baldock into her car and drove him to a riverbank. The moment he stepped out, Wigington ambushed him with a hunting knife so violently that investigators said the wounds were frenzied and his throat was sliced so deep his head was nearly severed. She crouched over him as he died and drank from the blood pouring from the gash in his neck. Detectives later said the scene was so saturated with blood it looked ritualistic, and photos recovered from Wigington showed she'd been staging mock sacrifices with her friends in the months leading up to the murder. When police searched her belongings, they also found jars of preserved animal remains and notebooks describing her goal of becoming a fully transformed vampire. She pleaded guilty and received life in prison, yet still walked free in 2012, leaving one of Australia's most senseless and sadistic murders behind her. In 2018, Richard Bebo Russell, a 28-year-old Horizon Air ground agent, stunned the aviation world when he quietly climbed into a Bombardier Q400 at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, started the engines from knowledge he'd picked up from YouTube and flight simulators, and took off without a license or clearance. For nearly an hour, he flew over Puget Sound chatting calmly with air traffic control, admitting he was a broken guy while performing a full barrel roll in a 76-seat passenger plane. F-15 fighter jets scrambled to intercept him, but he refused to land, steering the aircraft away from cities before deliberately crashing it into the woods of Ketron Island. The explosion killed only him, scorched acres of forest, and exposed a massive security gap at the airport. In 2014, 43-year-old Chad Olson was reportedly texting his babysitter during movie previews when the man behind him, 71-year-old retired police captain Curtis Reeves, told him to put the phone away. The argument escalated. Olson tossed a handful of popcorn in frustration, and Reeves instantly responded by pulling a handgun and shooting him in the chest. Olson died later that day, while his wife was also injured while trying to block the shot with her hand. Despite witnesses saying Olson never got physical beyond the popcorn, a jury ultimately acquitted Reeves in 2022, accepting his claim that he fired in self-defense under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Ariana Grande's life has been marked by unimaginable tragedy. In 2017, during her concert at Manchester Arena, a suicide bomber set off an explosive as fans were leaving the show. 22 people were killed, some of them children, and hundreds more were injured. The tragedy left Ariana with PTSD and deep survivor's guilt, something she said she'll never fully recover from. Just a year later, she lost her ex-boyfriend Mac Miller to an overdose, a loss that left her completely shattered. In 2019, she revealed how deeply those experiences affected her, sharing a brain scan that showed severe patterns of trauma, comparing it to a healthy brain and one with PTSD. Hers lit up the same way as the trauma scan, as she called it hilarious and terrifying, not a joke. In the years since, fans have noticed a drastic change in her appearance. Her once soft features now look sharper and hollowed, her frame thinner, her face at times hauntingly fragile. Whether from stress, age, or the weight of everything she's endured, Ariana's transformation feels like a visible reminder of how much she's had to carry. In 1985, veteran Miami Herald photographer Bob East went into surgery to remove a cancerous eyeball, but a tragic hospital mistake killed him instead. During the operation, doctors accidentally injected a toxic preservative chemical into his spine, thinking it was spinal fluid. The chemical, meant to preserve his removed eye, instantly caused brain damage, and East was declared brain dead soon after. He was eventually taken off of life support, while the hospital later admitted the mix-up and paid his family a $2 million settlement. When the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff in 1986, it didn't disintegrate immediately like many believe. The crew cabin actually remained intact. For nearly 3 agonizing minutes, it tumbled toward the Atlantic Ocean from a height of 50,000 feet. Investigators later found that air packs had been manually activated, suggesting that some of the 7 astronauts were still alive and possibly conscious during the entire fall. The cabin struck the ocean at over 200 miles per hour, killing everyone on impact. He convinced her he was a 300-year-old werewolf, and it led to one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history. In 2006, 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson fell into a secret relationship with 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke, a self-proclaimed 300-year-old werewolf with a history of abuse, drugs, and violent fantasies. The pair openly talked about murdering people, even modeling themselves after natural-born killers. On the night of April 23rd, Steinke slipped into the Richardson home while high and drunk and stabbed Jasmine's mother 24 times, then brutally killed her father after telling him it's what your daughter wanted. Upstairs, Jasmine murdered her 8-year-old brother as he tried to defend himself with a toy lightsaber. Hours later, instead of hiding, the couple went to a party laughing, making out, and laughing about how her little brother gargled as he died. Arrested the next morning, Jasmine became Canada's youngest person ever convicted of multiple murders. She served the maximum youth sentence, had her record completely wiped in 2020, changed her name, and now lives in the community. While Steinke, now calling himself Jackson May, serves life with parole eligible in 2032. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. Kim Kardashian's 2018 Met Gala photo, taken in front of the gilded coffin of Nedja Monk, caught the attention of the Manhattan DA's Antiquities Trafficking Unit. When investigators looked into the artifact's paperwork, they discovered the export documents were forged and the coffin had actually been looted from Egypt in 2011. The viral photo helped trigger the investigation that ultimately exposed the trafficking network and led to the coffin being returned to Egypt in 2019. When Yoshitaro Shibasaki and his team scaled Mount Tsurugi in 1907, believed at the time to be Japan's final unclimbed peak, they were stunned to find ancient relics already waiting at the summit. A decorative metal staff fitting and a sword were discovered near the top, and later analysis revealed they'd been placed there over 1,000 years earlier. This 250-year-old mechanical swan still glides and bends its neck as if it were still alive. Built in 1773 by master showman James Cox and ingenious inventor John Joseph Merlin, the automaton uses hundreds of hidden clockwork components to make the bird preen, ripple the water below it, and even snatch a silver fish from the stream. In 1835, a man digging a duck pond in Margate, England, accidentally discovered the Shell Grotto, an underground chalk passage decorated with about 4.6 million seashells arranged across 2,000 square feet of mosaic. Most of the shells, mussels, oysters, scallops, etc., appear to have been collected from nearby Kent beaches, though some are foreign species. Its age, purpose, and creators remain completely unknown. On November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the largest freighters to ever sail the Great Lakes, vanished without a single distress call. She was hauling 26,000 tons of iron ore across Lake Superior, a route sailors today still call the Graveyard of the Great Lakes. As a brutal storm ripped across the lake, wind gusts reached hurricane force and waves rose over 30 feet. Nearby ships radioed that the Fitzgerald was taking whitewater over the deck, and her radar was down, vents smashed, and one of her lifeboats already torn apart by the waves. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley made his final transmission. "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the 729-foot ship dropped off radar completely. When search teams managed to locate the wreck 2 days later, the bow was found buried more than 20 feet into the lake bed, showing how quick the ship plummeted through the water. The crew quarters were crushed flat, showing how violently the ship hit the bottom. So fast, the men never even reached their emergency stations. Divers later found crew hard hats still sitting neatly in their storage racks. All 29 crew members were lost, as not a single body was ever recovered. While the exact cause of the sinking still remains a mystery, many experts believe the Fitzgerald was struck by a rare Three Sisters, a set of massive rogue waves that can swallow a vessel in seconds, snapping the large ship in two and sending all 29 men to their graves 530 feet below the surface. In 1995, divers retrieved the ship's bell, the only piece ever brought to the surface, and replaced it with a memorial bell engraved with all 29 names. Every November 10th, it's rung 29 times, one toll for each life lost. Trailer Park Boys star Mike Smith, best known as the harmless wide-eyed Bubbles, has been charged with sexual assault in Nova Scotia for an incident that allegedly happened back in 2017, a case that stayed buried for nearly 8 years before finally surfacing in court. The identity of the victim is under a strict publication ban, but Smith is now legally barred from contacting them or going anywhere near their work, home, or school. The charge has forced him to step away from the Trailer Park Boys production company, tainting the wholesome persona millions have associated with him. Deep inside a sulfur-filled cave on the Albania-Greece border, scientists have uncovered the largest spiderweb ever recorded, an enormous 106-meter sheet stretched across the cavern's walls. Hundreds of thousands of spiders from two normally rival species have formed a massive cooperative colony, a terrifying behavior never before seen in spiders. The cave's toxic, sunless environment created a self-sustaining ecosystem powered by sulfur-eating microbes which attracted swarms of insects, which in turn supplied this spider megacity with endless food. The web is so dense and vast it looks like the cave is wrapped in ghostly white fabric, proof that life can evolve into something terrifyingly efficient when pushed into extreme conditions. In 2023, British TV presenter Holly Willoughby narrowly escaped a fate straight out of a nightmare. Her stalker, 36-year-old security guard Gavin Plumb, had been secretly building what prosecutors called a murder kit in his Essex home. Ropes, metal cable ties, chloroform, and knives, all carefully organized for a late-night abduction. He spent over 18 months plotting every step, obsessively saving thousands of images of Willoughby, including hundreds of deepfakes he made to fuel his fantasies. Plumb shared his entire plan with someone he met on a dark chat room called Abduct Lovers, where over 100 members spent hours trading violent fantasies. He even sent voice memos describing how they'd hit at night when traffic was low, and how he'd chloroform both of them, referring to Willoughby and her husband. But what he didn't know was that his online partner wasn't a killer, he was an undercover US federal agent. When British police stormed Plumb's apartment, they found his computer filled with explicit material, detailed kidnap instructions, and surveillance notes about Willoughby's security routines. He knew her full schedule and had even written down what time she usually woke up. In July of 2024, Plumb was sentenced to life in prison with at least 16 years before parole. Food influencer Michael Duarte, known online as Food with Bare Hands, built a massive following by grilling, cooking, and feeding strangers with his bare hands. But on November 8, 2025, his life ended in shocking fashion during a family trip to Texas. Police responded to a disturbance call involving a man reportedly acting erratically with a knife, and Duarte was fatally shot by deputies on the scene. Witnesses later described the moment as chaotic and heartbreaking, with his family present during the incident. The tragedy struck just 3 days after he and his wife celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary. In the immediate aftermath, Duarte's talent agency and family had presented his death via a GoFundMe campaign as a horrible accident, without initially disclosing police involvement. The family has since asked for privacy and support, as funeral arrangements are made and efforts to return his body to California proceed. Duarte was only 36 years old and leaves behind wife Jessica, daughter Oakley, and millions of fans who watched him turn simple meals into moments of kindness and generosity. Despite growing up deaf and blind, Helen Keller was a supporter of eugenics. She believed that infants who were born with severe mental or physical disabilities were better off dying. Tobacco companies spend the most money on advertising during the month of January. This is because January is when most people are trying to quit as New Year's resolutions. This is a photo of an Iraqi officer with a fearless expression on his face just moments before being beheaded by an ISIS militant. Male otters have been known to violently rape female otters, baby seals, and other sea creatures. Sadly, this often results in death for the victims, since the male otter will sometimes bite and drown them to get his way. In 2003, a woman from Texas hit a homeless man with her car and his body became lodged in her windshield. She drove home with him still stuck in the car and repeatedly apologized to the man when he was in her garage. But she never called for help, and the man died 2 days later as the woman received 50 years in prison. Dodo birds were very friendly and curious animals since they had no natural predators. And then we came along and killed them all. For animal testing involving dogs, most laboratories use beagles because they're the most forgiving of humans inflicting pain on them. In the 1920s, the federal government poisoned alcohol in an effort to curb consumption during Prohibition. As a result, more than 10,000 Americans died from poisoning by their own government. Just 2 years after filming Ferris Bueller, Matthew Broderick killed 2 women while driving on the wrong side of the road in Ireland. He said he had no recollection of the incident and got off with a $175 fine. A male gorilla named Michael learned sign language and once used it to describe his mother being shot and killed by poachers. 2 years ago, a distress message was found in a can of sardines saying, "We are Sudanese laborers enslaved by this company." An investigation was opened by Egyptian authorities, but nothing ever came of it. Genghis Khan would marry off one of his daughters to the king of an allied nation and then assign his new son-in-law to military duty. As Khan expected, most of these son-in-laws would die in combat, giving his daughters complete control over these nations. This is why saturation diving is one of the highest paying jobs in the world. In 1983, 4 rig workers were working deep in a diving chamber in the North Sea. When one of the men opened a hatch too early, the chamber quickly depressurized and dropped from 9 atmospheres of pressure to 1 in less than a second. All 4 men were killed instantly as the pressure was so explosive that it caused 3 of the divers' blood to flash boil. The 4th diver wasn't any luckier as he was forced through a small opening and violently torn apart. According to the autopsy, all of the organs of his chest were launched out of his body and projected upwards more than 30 feet. All of the men likely died immediately, but the investigators were never the same after discovering such a gruesome scene. Kim Jong-un travels with his own toilet to prevent his excretions from falling into the wrong hands. The waste contains important information about his health status and can't be left behind. In the 1960s, the CIA spent $20 million on a cat equipped with gear to spy on the Soviets. Sadly, the operation was cancelled when the cat was hit and killed by a taxi almost immediately. A 115-year-old woman from Nepal has been smoking at least 1 pack of cigarettes per day since 1920. She claims that smoking has aided in her longevity and that all the doctors who advised her to quit have already died.